In this video, we're going to be discussing circle graphs. So circle graphs can be used to represent ratios or fractions because they show the relationship between a part and a whole. And let's go over the different pieces of circle graphs. And these are the main pieces that we're going to stick to when we do our construction later on with this lesson. So the shaded section of the circle graph always represents 100%. So a whole circle graph is out of 100%, or the fraction 1 over 1. Because 1 divided by 1 would be 1, and 1 is 100%. This shaded section here, the dark shaded section, represents 50%, or the fraction 1/2. Now, the other way that you could think about this is we could cut it along this line here, and this would be 2/4. And if you simplified it, you would get 1/2 of the circle. The next one, this little corner piece, represents 25%, or 1/4 of the circle. You could also do the little cut like we did in the last one. 1 out of 4 total pieces if we think of this as a whole. The shaded section of the circle graph represents, in this one, I have the half plus the 25% extra. So this is 50. We know that from above. This is 25. We know that from over on the other side. 50 plus 25 gives you 75%, or it's 3/4 of the fraction. And you can think of that like money. Our last two pieces are this little section here. So if you think of it, this L here is 25%. And if you do 25 divided by 2 pieces, 2 goes into 25 once, drop the 5, 2 goes into 5 2 times, which would be 4, 1, bring down a 0. When you do that, you have to add the decimal, and 5 is left over. So this represents 12.5%, or if we get the fraction, we're going to follow the cut of this here. We're going to cut here, cut this one diagonal here, and it's helpful if you use a ruler. I just have to eyeball it here. So because this is the smallest piece we're looking at, I had to cut the circle to match all of those, and this is 1 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 1/8 represents 12.5%. And then the last one here, there's 2 pieces, but because it makes the L, that's 25%, or the fraction, and if we follow what we did last time and we cut, because we're looking at these pieces here, and I'm using dotted lines because I'm not really cutting the shape, I can see that there's 1, 2 of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it could be 2/8, or you could think of it as 1 of the 4ths, since I'm using the corner. So let's look at the next page. So it says, given each circle graph, determine an estimate for the fraction, decimal, and percent. So the most important part is you're going to look to see what's the smallest section. And if I continue some of these cuts here, I'm going to continue this one across there. Now this piece, which is that little corner, is cut in half, so I need to cut the corner in half, and I'm going to have to do that on this side as well. So now the whole circle is cut into 1/8 because I had to go according to the smallest piece. So what fraction is yellow? Well, there's 1 yellow piece out of 8 total pieces, 1/8. And if you do the long division for that, well, we'll come back to it. Let's finish the rest of the fractions. The red is 1, 2, 3, 4/8. And if you simplify that down, that really is 1/2. And you can tell that it's half of the circle that's colored. If you look at the purple, it would be 2/8, or it's actually that perfect L, that corner. So that's really 1/4 if you simplify it. And then the last piece, that gray piece, is 1/8 again, 1 out of 8 pieces. Now, all of these fractions are fractions that we have memorized from the previous page. So you can look back at that page, or you can do the long division to get the decimals. Either one works. If you do 1/8, it goes into 1 0 times. Decimal 2, 8, 2, bring down a 0. It goes into 20. Oh, why did I put a 2 up top? That should be 1. 1. It goes in 22 times, which is 16. 20 minus 16 is 4. And bring down a 0, and I get 40, which would be 5. So that's 0.125, which is also going to match this one because they're the same thing. Half I have memorized, which is 0.5. And 1/4 is 0.25. Think money. If you turn those to percents, you can move the decimal 2, so that becomes 12.5%. This one becomes 50%. This one becomes 25%. And this one becomes 12.5%, like the one above. It's very helpful if you can have some of these percentages memorized so that you can just move quickly through creating your circle graphs. Okay, let's look at number 2. So our smallest piece is right there. So I'm going to always start by cutting vertically and then horizontally. And then if you need to cut further from there, you can cut the diagonals out. All right, so the yellow is 4/8, which is also 1/2 if you simplify, or you could just see it from the picture. The orange is 1/8 because there's 1 out of 8 pieces that are colored orange, and then there's 3 out of 8 pieces that are colored white. Now, 1/2 I have memorized as a decimal is 0.5. 1/8 I know from the previous problem is 0.125. Now, 3/8 I don't have that one yet, and I don't have it in my previous notes. So I need to do some long division for that one. 8 doesn't go into 3. 8 goes into 30 3 times, which is 24. 30 minus 24 is 6. Bring down a 0. 8 goes into 60 7 times, which is 56. Subtract, I get 4. Bring down a last 0, and it goes in 5 times. So this is 0.375. Then I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the right to make a percentage. So this becomes 50%. This becomes 12.5%. And this becomes 37.5%. Okay. So I want you to do number 3 on your own. Do number 3, and then when you're ready, we will check your work. So if you look at my picture, I cut this one a little bit different because I had to follow the lines. So I did a horizontal and I did a vertical. And then from there, it's not cut perfectly down the middle, so I actually had to cut it in each whole piece into thirds. So if you look at it, the yellow represents 4/12, and if I simplify that down, I actually get to 1/3. The red is the same size as the yellow, which is 4/12, but really we simplified that down to 1/3. The purple is 2/12, and if we simplify that, we get 1/6. And then the green is also 2/12, so that's also going to be 1/6. And then if we turn them to decimals, 1/3 as a decimal. 3 doesn't go into 1. 3 goes into 10 3 times with a 9. Remainder 1, bring down a 0. I see a pattern starting to happen. Bring down the last 0, 3. So it's repeating 3. So this is 0.3 repeating. And this one's also going to be 0.3 repeating because it's the same. And if I do the 1/6, oops, wrong way. 6 goes into 10 one time. 4, bring down 0. 6 goes into 40 6 times. 4. I see a pattern starting to happen. Oops. So it's repeating 6, so 0.16 repeating, and the same thing for the one below because they're the same. And if I turn it to a percent, move 2 over to the percent sign, so this becomes 33.3 repeating percent. This same thing. And then this one's going to be 16.6 repeating percent, and the same thing for the last one. Okay, try number 4, and when you're ready, unpause to check your work. So there's your answer for number 4. This was another one you had to cut into 12ths, and then you had to find the decimal for each fraction and then turn it to a percentage. Now let's look at actually how do we construct circle graphs. So when we construct circle graphs, it's important to remember we're going to determine the total, write each piece of data as a ratio or as a fraction, and then we're going to turn each ratio or the fraction into a percent. And we're going to use the basic sections of the circle graph that we discussed at the beginning. So we have half, which is 50, the quarter, which is 25, the half of the quarter, which is 12.5, and then 75%, which is like the halfway around plus a little bit more. So here's our example. It says, Bird Middle School did a survey of 100 students to see their favorite kinds of music. Complete the table and show the results of this survey in the circle graph. Make sure to include the title and a key. Now, I recommend when we start construction of the circle graphs that you use either a pattern or colored pencils or markers or crayons so that you can easily determine what sections mean what. So let's answer the first question, what is the total? Well, we're surveying 100 students, and you're going to use the total as the denominator in our ratio. So if we look over and we fill out the table, 26 people chose country, so that's going to be 26 out of 100. Jazz is 11 out of 100. Rock is 50 out of 100. And other is 13 out of 100. Percents are out of 100, so automatically this is 26%, this is 11%, this is 50%, and this is 13%. All right, so that wasn't too difficult because it was out of 100. That was an easy one. So the title of this, we should probably title it Favorite Kinds of Music. And I spelled favorite wrong there. So we're going to title this Favorite Kinds of Music. And I personally like to start out, make a very, very light, and I recommend you use a ruler for this. Very lightly make the crosshairs in your circle graph. It's already on this notes page for you, but in the future when you have to draw it yourself, make a very light crosshair so that you can already cut it into those fourths so you can see them very easily. So I always recommend find the ones that fit closest to those 50, 25, 12.5, 75. Well, 26 is very close to 25%. So I'm just going to call one of the sections that's 25%. So I'm going to call it this section right here. So right here, I'm going to draw solid lines right on that 25% line, and I'm going to call this country. And that's 25%. And if you want to choose a color to color country, you can make a little box and write country there, and maybe I'll make mine yellow. So there's my country. Now let's look for another one that's an easy one. We did this one. There's 50. 50, we know that one. That's a half already. So I'm going to extend this line down, or you could extend it across, either one, it doesn't matter. And this whole section represents rock and roll, I believe. Yep, rock and roll. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to write rock and roll. And that's 50%. Make a little box, rock and roll. Pick a color, use a pattern, whatever works for you. Just so it's a little bit easier to see. All right, now here's where we start to run into some trouble. 11 and 13. Well, the other section that's small enough is 12.5. 12.5 represents half of a corner, which is 25. So I am pretty close that if I were to freehand draw this, I'm going to have one section that's a little bit bigger than the other. I would say this one's the bigger one. So I would say that one represents the 13%, so other. And they should be very close in size because 13% and 11% are very, very close to each other. So there's not really going to be much that's different about them. So this one's going to be other. And the last one is jazz. And that's going to represent this one. And then you can use your colored pencils or your markers, or your crayons, and just give those some color so that they're easily able to be read. Now, so that's our circle graph, and that is relatable to our table. Now, when you go to do the next one on your own, you're going to have to do a little bit of work because this isn't out of 100. This is only out of however many you get when you add those together to get your total, which is going to go up here. Then you have to make sure you turn it in that decimal and then turn it to a percent. Then you can create your circle graph here. Remember, stick close to the 25, 50, 75, 12.5 rules. Okay?